fundraising from the business sector during this very unique season. Hi, I'm Bill Stanczykiewicz. This is the first day from the fundraising school, and I'm joined today by Kyla Carlsen. Kyla is the Director of Programs for COACT Detroit, which works with a broad range of nonprofits across southeastern Michigan, including helping them understand charitable giving from the business sector. And Kyla, thanks so much for being with us on this podcast. First of all, help our audience understand what is COACT Detroit.
Absolutely, and thanks so much for having me, Bill. So COACT Detroit is a resource hub for nonprofits. In normal pre-COVID times, we are a physical space in New Center, Detroit. So we have a 6,500 square foot meeting and event space that we make accessible to nonprofits to host workshops, community meetings, and really be a centralized hub where they can plug in and get connected to resources and to each other. We also offer capacity building programs, grant funding, and again, serve as a centralized connector to connect nonprofits to resources and to others in different sectors, from government to philanthropy and the business sector.
That is wonderful capacity building and information sharing work that you and your colleagues provide, including the gatherings. You said you serve as a hub, bringing nonprofits together to hear about various topics in the philanthropic sector. And I know during the pandemic, you've been helping people understand about charitable giving from the business sector. You are a frontline expert. What are you hearing from these business leaders on how their charitable giving might be the same, or importantly, might be different because of the pandemic?
Yes. So, before the pandemic, we already knew that corporations had certain focus areas that they were focused on. So, for example, banks might be focused on financial literacy, grocery stores focused on health and nutrition or alleviating hunger. What we started to see in the midst of the pandemic was really a shift towards supporting health and human services. And this is typical during any crisis. There's a focus on, ensuring that folks' basic needs can be met. And then the other shift and trend that we saw was focused on supporting and working with existing grantees. So really ensuring that the organizations these corporations had already invested in had the support and resources that they needed to be resilient and strong during everything we've experienced over the past 6 to 8 months. We've also been seeing a trend in corporate giving away from traditional sponsorships. Sure, there is still corporate philanthropy and giving towards programmatic dollars, but there's also an increasing trend towards skills-based giving. And this can be a mutually beneficial arrangement for both a nonprofit to receive some direct operational capacity from different backgrounds and different areas of expertise, but it's also really beneficial for corporate employers to be able to engage their employees in a different and more meaningful way. And then the other trends that we've seen right now are increased collaboration between corporations and the government and philanthropic sector. So for example, here in Detroit, things have been moving very quickly. I think all sectors have been moving faster than maybe they would during other times to really come together. And so, back in the spring, within a matter of weeks, really, those different entities came together to provide laptops to students to support with online and remote learning. And so there's definitely, this increased desire to work together and to be responsive really quickly to what the most urgent basic human needs are right now. And then the last piece I'll share is, there has been a corresponding economic impact of the pandemic. And while there's, we've seen things go down and then go back up, there's a lot of volatility and a lot of uncertainty. And all of that has an impact on the amount of corporate dollars available for giving. And so we are starting to see, again, a shift in corporate philanthropy towards really focusing on those basic health and human needs and existing relationships with grantees, and a bit of restriction on the amount of giving dollars available.
And Kyla, your thorough answer there is supported by the early data where we saw that actually the business sector was providing some of the largest dollar amounts in total in the early days of the pandemic. But as you noted, specifically to those immediate need and human service types of nonprofits. And you said that the business donors who you've been listening to, who you've been hosting on behalf of nonprofits there in the Detroit area, have been saying that they were staying primarily with the nonprofits who they knew already. How did the nonprofits respond to that? Was there this kind of collective groan like, oh no, now I can't fundraise from the business sector? Or was there a reassurance that it's a good thing I was doing my work before the pandemic that I have those relationships in place?
Absolutely. I think it is certainly there was already an emphasis on building those relationships with the corporate sector. So we've been hosting this corporate social responsibility series since last year, right? Since well before the pandemic. And there was already, a growing desire between both the business community and the nonprofit community to build these relationships because it takes time. And so, ideally you do that ahead of time so that when something like a pandemic happens, you already have those relationships in place. We know that it continues to be a struggle for smaller organizations to have access to be able to build those relationships. And that's one of the reasons and the mission as part of our conversation series to create that space for folks to connect. And, the other thing is what we're hearing is to really rely on board members. So for nonprofits who maybe don't have existing relationships with corporations, now is the time to tap into your board and ask them to make those phone calls on your behalf. And then also to look more expansively to your network and maybe look at who's volunteering with you or what different relationships others within your organization may have. And this was, again, not specific to the pandemic, but something that I think folks can be aware of and fundraisers can be aware of right now is it doesn't always have to be a relationship directly with the corporate social responsibility department. An employee at any level can be your gateway and your entry to a corporation. And oftentimes CSR departments want that information to come from their employees. They want to hear what their employees are passionate about and who they're volunteering with.
Kyla, I'm wondering if you and your colleagues have seen any distinction. Have you been hosting primarily larger corporations? Have you been including some locally owned businesses or regional businesses? And if there are some distinctions in terms of size, are you seeing any differences as they talk about corporate giving during this pandemic season?
So our series has primarily hosted somewhat larger corporations, though we do have a really interesting, I think, partnership going on in the small business community called Feed the Frontlines. So absolutely here locally, lots of small businesses have really galvanized around supporting nonprofits and supporting community. And I think that's somewhat embedded in our culture here in Detroit. But through this series, we've hosted both regional and national organizations. We've hosted partners from Deloitte, JP Morgan Chase, and then some of our sort of local large players as well. So Kroger, our DT Energy company. And so really, a range of regional, national, large organizations. And remind me the second part of your question?
Is there any differences then? If I'm, say, a locally owned business in Detroit compared to, I have a regional office of a national corporation, have you seen any differences in that regard?
Sure. I think the sheer size of what an organization is able to give impacts their relationship. And so, with the smaller businesses, they're, really donating a lot of in-kind services. Again, the Feed the Frontlines is a great example where they're local restaurants and what they're able to provide is food. Whereas, a lot of the larger organizations are looking at more robust or holistic strategies in terms of giving. Both JP Morgan Chase has donated a substantial amount into Detroit in terms of dollars, as well as skills-based giving and some of those larger programs that are common to corporations.
Can you please give a greater explanation of what is skills-based giving? And if this involves their employees, how do we do this while sheltering in place?
Absolutely. And actually, that was the topic of our last conversation that is available to be recorded. I'm happy to share the link. So skills-based giving is where, there's actually several different formats. So it could be, a one-day engagement, or more often it's sort of an ongoing engagement for a set period of time that's somewhat project-based. And rather than giving money, you are giving your time and expertise. And, so an example of this might be an IT employee builds a customer relationship management database for a nonprofit. or one of our partners had a new logo designed from a marketing employee at a corporation. And so these engagements, again, are really meaningful for corporate employees. They, what corporations are seeing is that their employees want to engage beyond the traditional service day model where you might go paint a school, and also that kind of volunteering has been really restricted with stay-home orders. This skills-based giving that's more knowledge-based and expertise-based can be done virtually and remotely, and it's much more project and deliverable driven. It is very time intensive, and so it can be challenging both for the corporation and for the nonprofit. And so again, we've heard some really great best practices around that in our last session.
And of course, we encourage fundraisers to appreciate that donation of philanthropy through that time and skill and expertise in and of itself. And also know that's a form of engagement, that hopefully you're forming a long-term relationship that perhaps could result in charitable giving of dollars later on down the line. Now,
Absolutely.
Kyla, please.
Oh, I would just add that's exactly right. And so our partners at TechTown Detroit, they have a really robust network of professional experts who donate their time to work with small business owners. And just as you said, they will send thank you notes from our fund development department, thanking folks for their time and for giving in that way, and even putting a dollar amount to that time that is being donated. It is a donation.
Wonderful form of engagement. Kyla, I need to ask you also, COAC Detroit, as I've learned about your wonderful organization, has been on the forefront of issues related with diversity, equity, and inclusion, even before the reemergence of this issue nationally in the summer of 2020. As we think about corporate giving, have you heard anything from the folks who you've been hosting at your conversations in that context? Is their corporate giving changing? What do nonprofit fundraisers need to know based on what you're hearing?
Absolutely, and thanks for bringing that up. So, I think we saw across the board several months ago with the, heightening awareness of racial injustice in this country. We saw many of the corporations coming out with statements, varying levels of commitment to anti-racism. And more recently, we've seen a lot of corporations actually make announcements on putting that into practice and some more specifics around what that looks like. So TCF, one of the largest banks here in Detroit and in Michigan, recently announced their $1 billion commitment to lending to minority-owned small businesses. Bank of America announced their $1 million economic opportunity programming. And most recently, JP Morgan announced their $30 billion commitment to racial equity. And where we're starting to see those commitments show up is in affordable housing and entrepreneurship and small business practices. So I would say from a fundraising perspective, if your organization's mission aligns with some of those activities, or if you're working on community development, housing development, that seems to be where some of the corporate philanthropy is starting to focus. And then the other thing we're hearing from the corporate sector is actually a lot of internal work. So a lot of organizations are starting to look internally. In the early stages, they were looking to employee resource groups and diversity and inclusion committees to hear about what actions and steps they should take. Different companies are working on internal metrics for hiring and for employee retention and growth opportunities. Also globally, Accenture, one of the largest accounting firms, is undergoing unconscious bias training, and actually launched a conversation series to create safe space for employees around the world to have conversations on race. And then the other trend that we're seeing right now in the corporate space is, again, focusing internally on supplier diversity. And so looking at how companies can increase their spend with minority and women-owned small businesses. And this is also a role where nonprofit organizations and fundraisers may be able to find a space to create partnerships. And again, I go back to the series that we launched, which is really about helping corporations talk about these initiatives, things that they may be working on internally, but sharing how they're thinking about showing up, how they're thinking of being responsible corporate citizens with the nonprofit sector, so that nonprofits and fundraisers can understand and position themselves as thought partners and leaders on that journey with corporations.
Kyla, there's so much good guidance there in your response. And, thinking certainly we need diversity on our boards of directors, of our nonprofit organizations, of our staff, in our donor databases, and yes, amongst our vendors as well. And that's something we need to be very intentional about. Now, charitable giving from the business sector is a specific module in so many of our courses at the Fundraising School. We have 20 public courses. Some of them are back in person, if that is your preference, and all of them are available online. We currently have a crisis response scholarship that allows you to attend our courses for a 50% discount. Now, we can also do custom training. We can bring training right to your nonprofit, your region, your association. We have these free podcasts. We also have quarterly webinars and monthly conversations that we call Fridays with the Fundraising School. All this information is available on our website at philanthropy.iupui.edu/the Fundraising School. Kyla Carlsen is the Director of Programs for COAC Detroit. I'm Bill Stanczykiewicz, and now you are more fully informed on this first day from the Fundraising School.